Well, thank you so much, everyone. It is the last day of the Aquatic Life Conference, day 3. We've already had a very, very interesting panel just before this one. Today's theme is all about ocean conservation, so sustainable oceans and aquaculture. This session is titled Protecting Wild Aquatic Animals, and I am your host for this session, Sofika Kostniuk, Managing Director of Aquatic Life Institute. Just a few quick housekeeping reminders for our attendees. The audience, all of you are muted upon entry with cameras off. When you have questions, and we certainly encourage you to ask questions throughout the session, but please just pop them into the Q&A box. We will answer them at the end of the session. Every session is being recorded and will be made available after the conference for you to review and or share with your colleagues and networks. We encourage you to do so. We expect respectful and productive discussions and do have a zero tolerance policy for harassment and discrimination of any kind. This session is 60 minutes long, and we have 3 wonderful panelists joining us today. It's my absolute pleasure to very briefly introduce them to you right now, and they can tell you much more about really who they are and what they do, what they focus on. We have Karl Orzechowski, Content Director for Faunalytics. Then we have Chris Hendrickson, founder of Paradise Snorkeling and Hawaii Marine Life. And last but not least, Joel Baziuk, Associate Director, Global Ghost Gear Initiative. This session is really focused on exploring the opportunities as well as the challenges in pursuing wild aquatic animal protection. And we know that somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 trillion wild aquatic animals are caught and killed every single year around the globe. This is an issue that absolutely can no longer be ignored. So without taking up any more time, myself, I'm just going to hand it over, and we'll ask Karl to please kick it off for us. Thank you.
Sure thing, and I'm just going to try to share my screen here.
That looks
Can you
great.
see that all right?
Yeah,
great.
Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Now I just need to move you guys over here. All right. Hello. As Sofika mentioned, my name is Karl Orzechowski, and I'm the content director for Faunalytics. For those of you who don't know us, Faunalytics is an organization that exists to help empower advocates with data to do their work as effectively as possible. It's always a kind of a funny thing for me to be involved with presentations at conferences where I'm sitting on panels with true experts because I don't personally consider myself an expert in any of these issues. But as the content director, I do read lots and lots and lots of academic research and am very much immersed in the issues day to day. But apart from ocean issues, I'm also looking at farmed animal issues, companion animal stuff, the whole spectrum. So today I wanted to talk to you about ocean issues by the numbers. Again, for a lot of you watching or for my fellow panelists, some of these things may not be surprising, but at Faunalytics, we deal with sort of a range of target audiences. One of our target audiences are advocates who actually use these materials, and then we also speak to the general public. So I wanted to start off by discussing what's probably the biggest issue facing wild aquatic species, which is global fishing. Now let's talk about this stark line that's sitting in the middle of the screen there. That line represents the total slaughter of wild fishes from the 60s till today. And you can see that that's a pretty steady upward trend. When it comes to our consumption of animals, fishes are consumed in by far the greatest numbers. So much so that if I place this line next to a line of cows or sheep or goats or pigs, the lines for cows or sheep or goats or pigs would look flat at the very bottom. If I put the line of chickens next to this, it would look a little, you'd start to see a little bit more of a rise as we consume chickens in quite significant numbers. But fish we consume by far the most out of any category of species on the planet. Further complicating matters is the fact that this graph reported as live weight. UN numbers don't count fishes as individuals. We count them in tons. So according to the most recent UN numbers, we slaughtered 91.4 million tons of fish in 2020. That's strictly wild caught, not counting aquaculture. And as Sofika mentioned, some researchers estimate that these numbers translate to trillions of individual fishes annually, anywhere from, I've seen as low as 1.4 to as high as, up in the high 2, low 3 trillion. And if we add aquaculture to this, it's somewhere close to 30 to 40% higher. And now here's a graph looking at the numbers by continent. Now, because it's a stacked graph, it does skew things a little bit, but the picture does appear to be flattening out. You can see kind of a rise towards the 80s, and then things appear that they're evening out. But as with the previous graphs, it's not really the case. Fish slaughter is actually rising very steadily in every continent except for Europe and the Americas. It has stabilized in Europe and the Americas, but that may be because of an increasing reliance on imports from other continents where the slaughter of fishes is going up and up and up and up with no signs of slowing down. Global fishing by weight. This is a heat map that shows every country in the world, and we can see here that when it comes to, on a country level, with raw numbers, we can see, what you might consider the usual suspects in global fishing emerge. China, a huge fishing country, Russia, Peru, India, Indonesia, no big surprises there. These are the nations that have traditionally been both big consumers of fish themselves, as well as major exporters to other nations. When we look at things on a per capita basis, though, things are much, much different. You may see a tiny little red dot down in the at the bottom of South America. That's the Falkland Islands. They hold the distinction of being the highest fish slaughterer per capita in the world, slaughtering somewhere around 20,000 tons of fish per capita in that nation. Of course, the average person in the Falkland Islands is not consuming 20,000 tons of fish a year. That is because they're a major exporting country. Now, from this sort of general overview of global fish slaughter, I wanted to look at some stats on a few specific issues that I think have become significant in recent years, and also represent some opportunities for advocacy. So the first one is shark finning. Now, again, for people who are attending the Aquatic Life Conference, you probably know about shark finning already. But the people that you're communicating with may not know about it, and here are some interesting things that you may want to share with them. So, in the early 2010s, films like Shark Water and related public pressure campaigns had a huge effect on this issue, really brought it to the forefront of consciousness. But shark finning is unfortunately still a practice that occurs around the world. Over 28% of shark species are either threatened, vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. Then there is not enough data to determine the status of a further 35% of shark species. So if you think of shark species as, as this pie chart, about a third of shark species are doing okay, about a third of shark species are in some level of threat, some of them critically, and then a whole other third we just don't know enough about. 80 countries have full or partial bans on shark finning, but still 73 million sharks are killed or traded around the world every year, and 50 million sharks are killed as bycatch by other fisheries. We like to think of shark finning as an issue that is like, primarily centered around Asian actors. But if we look at this map of the US, we can see that shark fin possession and sale is actually only banned in 13 states. Shark fin possession and sale is allowed in most of the United States, and in a range of states, you can actually still get shark fin soup on a menu. Next issue I wanted to talk about is coral bleaching. Coral bleaching occurs when anomalously warm ocean temperatures persist over time. As climate is changing, it's resulting in massive bleaching events that are devastating coral around the world. And that's a problem, of course, not only because coral protects coastlines, but because coral reefs are home to a tremendous amount of aquatic life. And on top of that, it takes 100,000 to 30 million years for a barrier reef to reach full maturity. These are not really renewable resources that are being destroyed. 20% of all coral in the world has died since 2015, and 75% of global reefs were damaged in bleaching from 2014 to 2017. And finally, I wanted to show a graph about ocean acidification. Now, this is an interesting issue because it's not one that your average advocate or your average person on the street probably knows anything about, but also can do as much about. But this is something that we need to talk about desperately, because the ocean absorbs a lot of carbon dioxide that's released into the atmosphere. We don't really think of the ocean as a carbon sink, but it absolutely is. That absorption increases ocean acidity. Since the Industrial Revolution, the pH of the surface ocean waters has fallen by about 0.1 pH units. In this graph here, before everyone jumps on me and tells me that this is not a zero-axis graph, I know this, but it's going down. In this graph, we can see that from the 80s, just from the 80s until now, we've gone down from 8.1, from an 8.1 pH level to an 8.05. So why that sounds like a minuscule drop, but why that's important is because the pH scale is logarithmic. So every point change is exponential. Since the Industrial Revolution, pH of the ocean has fallen by 0.1 pH units. Again, doesn't sound like much. It's actually a 30% increase in acidity. And so finally, why is this important, and why do we have to struggle so hard to get the message out there? Well, public opinion data that's been gathered from around the world finds that when it comes to ocean health and getting people to recognize this issue, we're fighting uphill, because 80% of people in aggregate polling think that the health of our oceans is good or excellent or reasonable. Only 15% of people think our oceans are threatened. 29% of people believe anywhere from a quarter to all of our oceans are protected in some way, when in actual fact, only 6.4% of the global oceans are protected by international laws or conservation authorities. And even, I would say, within that 6.4%, enforcement remains an issue. So a lot of these facts and stats are drawn from a resource that I created for Faunalytics called the Ocean Life Fundamentals. We have a series of what we call the fundamentals that are on our website, where you can get kind of an overview of different animal category issues. So you can find out about farmed animals, companion animals, wildlife, aquatic species, ocean life. But in the meantime, if you have any questions about this or any other data needs, you can always reach out to your friends at Faunalytics. We're at faunalytics.org. You can drop by our office hours at faunalytics.org/ask us, and you can get research advice and resources at faunalytics.org/research advice. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Carl. That's really, really fascinating stuff. I think the majority of us in the movement certainly base our communications and our campaigns in data. But, you know, you being such a data guy expert, I'm very curious as to just one question before we pop over to Chris. How do you sort of hone in on those key statistics that you want to bring attention to? So for example, today you focused on shark finning, coral bleaching, ocean acidification. Why, you know, why those three areas of focus to get your point across?
So I find for myself personally, when I'm trying to think of the statistics and resources that are going to get people interested, or at least for people to be able to like recognize the gravity of an issue, you want to find statistics, one, that they're going to understand. I even thought about not including the ocean acidification stuff because it's kind of a hard thing to wrap your mind around, and why is acidification necessarily a bad thing, and on and on. These are the kind of things that like, you know, your average lay person is not necessarily going to understand. I wanted to talk about ghost gear so bad because ghost gear is such a great issue, but I saw that Joel was going to be on the presentation, and I thought, not going to go toe to toe with an expert in the panel itself. So, you know, we're going to hear a lot more about ghost gear soon. And I think that's a major issue that I think a lot of people don't necessarily know exists, but as soon as they hear about it, they intuitively understand, oh, right, like used fishing gear has to go somewhere. It probably ends up in the ocean. I can understand why that's a problem. And once you start to dig into the statistics of like just how much ghost gear affects aquatic species, then people really perk up. So I think, you know, being tuned into the kinds of statistics that are going to be understandable for the average person is really important. Of course, there are all kinds of like more kind of eggheady things we can get into, really kind of like nitty-gritty details that you're probably talking about at a certain level during this conference, that most people will kind of glaze over talking about. They're still super important, but when it comes to public communication, we want to pick the things that are going to be the most impactful the most quickly.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And super quick comment. I love the fact that I'm assuming everyone on your team works remotely, and you do, but you have office hours for the public, and
Yes.
Yeah, and for people to reach you. So that's something that I'm going to look into. Love it.
Cool.
Thank you. Okay, Chris, please take the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. My audio working well?
Yeah, very clear.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll share my screen just now. And thank you, Carol. Your statistics very much teed up my presentation. So thank you for laying down that foundation. Everybody, aloha. My name is Chris Hendrickson. I am a biologist, animal protection advocate, certified free diver, advanced open water scuba diver, and videographer. I'm also the founder of Hawaii Marine Life. And the mission of Hawaii Marine Life is to highlight the beauty of Hawaii's oceans and species to conserve for future generations. I use video footage of my adventures underwater to advocate for ocean conservation and connect with people around the world. Over the last 2 years, I've reached just over 1 million accounts on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And to aid in this mission, I started a snorkel tour company called Paradise Snorkeling, where I personally guide people who want to explore and learn about marine life on Maui. Through this, I have been able to directly advocate the value of protecting marine species, reducing plastic waste, and eliminating or reducing fish from our diets. Today, I'm going to be sharing why marine conservation areas are very important for protecting oceans using the island of Maui as an anecdote. I'll demonstrate how marine conservation areas have positively impacted species around the island and the value that marine conservation areas provide both ecologically and economically. So this is where I said your stats teed me up perfectly for this because I go over this. So currently less than 8% of the oceans are protected, as Carol mentioned, yet 2.4 billion people, about 40% of the global population, live within 100 kilometers or 60 miles of the coast. Yet surprisingly, in 2019, the Lloyd Register Foundation World Risk Poll found that a majority of people aged 15 and older, 55%, said they cannot swim unassisted. So the facts that 80% of marine pollution comes from land-based activities, that 60% of reefs are currently threatened with the combination of global warming, ocean acidification, and other anthropogenic impacts, which is likely to rise to 90% by 2030. And the fact that 80% of all litter in our oceans is plastic, these facts are largely hidden from people's everyday experience. So from coral bleaching to rising sea levels, entire marine ecosystems are rapidly changing, yet a prominent time for people to have any involvement with our oceans is on vacation. A global survey sponsored by Expedia.com in 2012 asked if one could take only one holiday. 33% of respondents said that they'd prefer the beach, and the survey found that 52% of respondents worldwide expected to vacation to the beach in the next 12 months. These metrics are important since a paper by researchers at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health in the UK revealed that visits to coastal environments resulted in greater calmness, enjoyment, and refreshment than visits to other outdoor locations. Since people are more likely to change their behaviors when in a calm and enjoyable setting, advocating for marine protection when people are on vacation is a novel way to advance protecting our oceans. In the United States, many people dream of hopping on a plane, visiting the beautiful and majestic beaches of Hawaii, and on average, about 6 million Americans visit the islands each year, and that number is even greater when you include other countries. One of Hawaii's most spectacular natural treasures is the wide variety of marine fishes that occur in the near shore waters of the state. Over 400 species of inshore and reef fishes inhabit Hawaii's coastal waters. There's a remarkable diversity among these fishes. For example, there's over 50 species of brightly colored wrasses, along with nearly 30 species of angelfish and butterfly fish. Large predators such as jacks and sharks also inhabit the reef area, and each one of these 400 species has its own unique role in the environment. What I'm going to do is outline a two-step process which is occurring in Hawaii to advance ocean conservation. The first step is to establish marine conservation districts. The second step is to create ecotourism opportunities to educate tourists and advance marine conservation. So marine life conservation districts, MLCDs, are designed to conserve and replenish marine resources. MLCDs allow only limited fishing and other consumptive uses, or they prohibit such uses entirely. They provide fish and other aquatic life with a protected area to grow and reproduce and are home to a great variety of species. Fishes in most MLCDs are fairly tame and often show little fear of humans. So that makes them a great spot for snorkeling, diving, and underwater photography. People get a really intimate experience with these animals. MLCDs were first introduced in Hawaii in the fall of 1967 with Hanauma Bay on Oahu. The resulting increase in fish population was phenomenal. The bay has now become world famous, and at the present, there are 11 MLCDs statewide, yet other sites are being considered as well. One of my favorite sites is Honolua Bay, located on the northwestern coast of Maui, about 10 miles north of Lahaina along Honoapi'ilani Highway. Within Honolua Bay, what you see in this photo, it is illegal to fish for, take, or injure any marine life, including eggs, or possess in the water any device that may be used for taking marine life. This is one of my favorite spots to take people on snorkel tours. They get a really, really amazing experience. In Hawaii, marine life conservation areas include over 1,300 acres of coastline and are protected, but unfortunately, this only translates to about 2 square miles. This is one local effort that is being made to protect oceans. Others include a ban on the sale of reef-harming sunscreen, like just went into effect on October 1st on the island of Maui, but federal protections can be enacted as well. The Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary was created by Congress in 1992 to protect humpback whales and their habitat in Hawaii. The sanctuary, which lies within the shallow, well, less than 600 feet, relatively shallow to a whale, it's like a bathtub, warm waters surrounding the main Hawaiian Islands constitute one of the world's most important humpback whale habitats. And additionally, the Papahana Umoku Akea Marine National Monument, a vast, remote, largely uninhabited marine region. The monument encompasses around approximately 500,000 square miles or 1.5 million square kilometers. Presidential Proclamation 8031, which was issued by President George W. Bush in 2006, set aside the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands as the Papahana Umoku Akea Marine National Monument, creating one of the largest fully protected marine conservation areas. While these federal protections are much more involved to establish, advocating for marine life conservation areas in popular tourism locations around the world is a wonderful way to ensure the protection of species and oceans. Once these areas are established, educating travelers is the next step. This involves the inclusion of local companies and populations so that tourism is a value add to local communities. Ecotourism is a market that was evaluated at $181.1 billion in 2019 and is expected to increase to $333.8 billion by 2027. Educating consumers and creating profit incentive for conservation efforts is imperative for pairing our capitalistic society with protecting the planet. Education starts when guests enter the conservation areas. More established locations can feature a beautiful visitor center where guests can watch a video like at Honauma Bay on Oahu, while less established areas like Kahekili Beach Park, another one of my favorites on Maui, can feature a sign and complete reinforcement of this knowledge through support of local populations. This can also be done through local equipment rental and activity companies. On Maui, vacation equipment rental companies like the Snorkel Store champion protecting the ocean by educating every guest about key ways that they can have a positive impact on our oceans. Renting equipment is not only a more eco-friendly option because items can be reused, but also reduces waste from plastic packaging of these products, which end up becoming single-use purchases. These items include snorkeling gear, umbrellas, beach chairs, everything you need for a vacation. And with 6 million guests traveling each year, many of these items that are purchased end up being thrown away within 10 days of that purchase because they don't get flown back. I mean, who's going to fly back a cooler, you know? These products and plastic packaging can end up in the ocean, which become extremely dangerous for marine species. The Snorkel Store even goes as far as to partner with local protection groups like the Maui Ocean Center's Marine Institute to protect turtles, aka honu, on the island. Airlines and hotels can play an important role in marine life, protecting marine life as well by offering mineral sunscreen, limiting access to single-use plastics, and educating guests in flight on how to behave in the water. They can play an important role in protecting the ecosystems, and this also makes them a more preferable choice for conscientious travelers. This also helps to offset their environmental footprint. So it's really a win-win for these companies to get involved in these ways. Nonprofits like the Pacific Whale Foundation take travelers on whale watching trips in the Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, where they educate about the species and why the protection of humpbacks, aka kohala, is important. Nonprofit and local governments are great advocates, and they can be wonderful when working with local companies to implement conservation and education efforts. Those who encourage travelers to visit conservation areas should detail the importance of not touching marine life or coral. They should use mineral sunscreen or sun protecting clothing. And by doing this, local companies protect the resources that allow them to profit for future generations and create a lifelong protected area. Since as we all know, the ocean is an amazing resource. It's very precious. Everyone needs to support from all levels. We need support from all levels to help in this process. As nonprofits and individual advocates, we can assist local populations in lobbying for government protections and also encourage them to start companies or nonprofits of their own to create an incentive to continue this protection. With all that being said, the videos I share seek to inspire those who view them to actually care and consider marine life in their day-to-day lives, because not everyone's on vacation every day. You can take action by reducing plastic usage, reducing or eliminating fish consumption from your diet, and being mindful and interacting with nature to not disturb it either physically or chemically. And together we can help protect this precious resource for future generations to come. So with that being said, I would just like to say a big mahalo nui loa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my experience. You can follow along with my journey on social media at Hawaii Marine Life on TikToks and Instagram, and on Twitter at Hi Marine Life. So take care, be well, and look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. What a wonderfully inspiring set of images. Are those all yours?
Yeah. So all of the images that were featured in this presentation were images that I shot, except for the Papahana Umoku Akia marine one. That was a map I got for use.
Okay. The team and I have just decided that for our next strategic retreat, we're coming to your backyard.
Please do.
Going on a
you're
snorkel
very
trip.
welcome. And yeah, we'll definitely show you the aloha spirit.
Amazing. But it really is about meeting people where they're at, and I really like the point that you made early on. And it's something that I hadn't thought about, is like advocacy while people are on vacation in a relaxed space, kind of maybe more open to conversations, have a bit more freed up brain space to think about issues that they don't in their regular life. So right in that space, introducing new ideas to them is a great way to sort of change hearts and minds. Thank you.
100%. And the fact that a majority of people can't swim unassisted when they're going to interact with the ocean via these ecotourism companies, making sure that we hit them where they are with the conservation messaging is imperative, because they're not going to get in the water otherwise if they're not interacting with that business. So yeah, I appreciate what you said, and look forward to hearing what Joel has to share.
Absolutely. Same here. So without further ado, we'll just turn it over to Joel.
Great. Thanks, everyone. There we go. Everyone see that?
That looks great. Full screen. Thank you.
Terrific. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Joel Basic. I'm the Associate Director of the Triple GI, as Safika mentioned. A quick little bit of background about me. I spent 20 years in Canada's commercial fishing industry as a harbor operations supervisor for the largest commercial fishing harbor in the country. And so my experience prior to taking on this role was very much on the ground, working with fishers every day. And in 2014, I started an end-of-life net recycling program for the nets that were piling up in the largest commercial fishing harbor in the country, which is how I became involved with the Global Ghost Gear Initiative when it first started. So just thought that'd be a helpful bit of context, that I have practical experience on the ground working with fishers, trying to deal with solutions to this issue. And then obviously I pivoted the career path to follow this full time and look at it through a global context. So first, for those of you who aren't aware, what exactly is ghost gear? It's been mentioned here already. It is the common name for abandoned, lost, discarded fishing gear. So fishing gear that is lost for some reason while fishers are out there. And we'll get into some of the reasons for that in a moment. But it definitely is one of the most, if not the most harmful form of marine debris that there is. And it's unsurprising, because it's purposely designed to capture aquatic life. That's what it does. And whether it's under human control or not, it's exceedingly good at that. And modern materials have made it last much longer in the marine environment and persist quite a while. And the idea of ghost fishing, as it's called, is where those nets or those traps or whatever it might be that's out there can continue to catch aquatic life, which will then die, and then scavengers or predators will go to feed on that. They can get caught themselves, and so it's a cyclic process. And because the materials last so long, it's extremely dangerous when it's lost in the environment. Of course, this varies by gear type, but in general, it's the most harmful form of marine debris. As far as how much of it is out there, I should put just a big thing that says it's complicated on that slide. The reality is we just don't know. There have been studies that have made suggestions on certain areas. In 2009, UNEP and FAO estimated about 10% of marine debris could be fishing gear. There's been a lot more research since then. A lot of people have jumped onto some numbers that just aren't able to be substantiated. More recent studies have suggested that it could make up to like about half to 70% of the floating macroplastic in the ocean gyre. gyres, but that's pretty specific. And it will vary depending on where you are on beaches and things like that. And generally it tends to be, and this has been mentioned in previous presentations on this panel already, that it's a subsurface issue for the most part. Once it's lost, we were talking about 46 to 70% of the floating macroplastic in the ocean gyres. Well, that's what's on the surface. What's beneath the surface is another huge unknown. And that's true for single-use plastics as well, all types of plastics and marine debris. A lot of it will sink over time, but certainly for gear, because one of the main causes of it, which we'll get into in a minute, is that it gets snagged on something beneath the surface and it tends to remain there. And it's also a problem for global food security. So up to 30%, depending on where you are, depending on the fish population, and depending on the gear type that you're talking about, can be affected by ghost gear every year. This is a major threat to food security, coastal communities, fisher livelihoods, the economy. It's a major issue that, again, and has been mentioned already, most people just don't think about. And I think the reason for that is that most people, when they walk down a beach, they're used to seeing single-use plastics, they're used to seeing bottles and straws and package and wrappers, not so much fishing gear, although that does vary depending on where you are. But most people don't have an experiential link with this particular aspect of marine debris. And the effects that it can have on wildlife are pretty significant. I'll just go through a couple of images. The images speak louder than words. Obviously, this is an issue for marine megafauna as well as harvestable fish populations, which otherwise could be going toward feeding the planet, where 3.5 billion people rely on seafood as their primary source of protein. So the destruction that it can cause is significant, and the images are, people react to them very viscerally and in an understandable way, because it's, it speaks to us in a way that, images of litter on a beach are terrible, but images of animals caught in gear obviously can reach people on a pretty fundamental level. So the causes of ghost gear, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what causes it. Most people, when they see images like that, are quick to just want to burn the fishing industry down and say we need to stop fishing altogether. And as I said, 3.5 billion people around the world rely on fishing as their primary source of protein. So there are ways that we can shift over the long term, but in the reality is right now, fishing as a whole is not going to go away. And so what we're looking for is to try to create best practices around this so that this type of thing doesn't happen. In terms of direct causes, this is usually, not exclusively, but usually not fishers throwing gear over the side of their boat. That gear costs them money. It's the means by which they feed their own families as well as the rest of the world. They don't want to lose their gear. No fisher ever wants to lose their gear. Most of the causes are things like really rough weather that can separate it from its buoys, other marine traffic, not realizing what it is. They drive over it, whether that's shipping, transport, recreation, separate it from its marker buoy, and now it's lost. They can't retrieve it. Where you have different gear types being used to harvest different species in different area or in the same area, where they can interact with one another and become entangled. These types of things. So there's a whole bunch of different reasons. I won't go through the whole thing. There's a bunch of them on the slide there, and there's often links with illegal, unreported, and unregulated, or IUU fishing as well, where illegal fishers will just cut their gear loose in order to avoid authorities if they're caught. So those are the main causes of gear loss. Now, again, where you see intentional discard or discard where a fisher will abandon it at sea or on a beach, this is where there's a lack of disposal facilities, where they're inaccessible, where they're expensive in parts of the world where these things just don't exist. And speaking from experience, being here on the west coast of Canada in one of the really well managed fisheries, there was no real end of life option for gear before we created a recycling program here. So if you expand that idea writ large around the world, it is much more common for there to be very few disposal facilities than there are areas where there are disposal facilities, and that can lead to gear ending up in the ocean. But it's not something that fishers want to do. If that happens, it's usually a last resort. And so what is the GGI? What is the organization that I represent? Housed under Ocean Conservancy, the Global Ghost Gear Initiative is the only cross-sectoral alliance committed to driving solutions to the problem of ALDFG or ghost gear worldwide. Really what we're trying to do is bring everyone around the table, whether it's NGOs, academics, governments, members of the seafood supply chain, fishers themselves, everyone around the same table in what we call a safe space to discuss this and understand what are the key challenges that fishers are facing while they're out there, and what best practices can we recommend implementing in order to minimize gear loss. At the end of the day, we want to improve the health of marine ecosystems, protect aquatic life from harm, and safeguard human health and livelihoods. And all those things are equally important. You need to bring everyone around the same table if you're going to find lasting solutions to such a cross-cutting issue. And we want to prevent gear from becoming lost in the first place. We want to mitigate its impacts when it does get lost, and remediate or remove the impacts of that gear where it's in critically sensitive habitat. Just a snapshot of what the GGI looks like. We have 135 member organizations across those various categories that I mentioned, 20 officially supporting governments, 4 high-level global affiliates spread across the globe. So we do have a global footprint. And a snapshot of some of our members. There'll be some very familiar logos on that slide, some that are not so much. Again, we have organizations that are doing really great work, just a few people, boots on the ground in a particular area, that are collecting critical data and doing really great work to protect sensitive marine ecosystems, all the way up to massive global corporates. And our philosophy is that we want to work with everyone who wants to work on this issue to try to improve it. So again, industry engagement, very important. We want to raise awareness about the issue. We want to learn from the industry about the causes of gear loss, so that we can come up with solutions that will work for the industry. Because you could come up with a document or a piece of policy that legislates a bunch of stuff that's completely unrealistic for the industry. And are you really going to have an impact at the end of the day? In the short term, the answer is no. You need to work with people in order to build it in and realize that they have a livelihood that they are also trying to carry out as well. So you need to make sure that these things are mutually beneficial. So we want to develop solutions with the industry. We want to minimize its impacts when gear is lost, and create, again, appropriate disposal options for end-of-life gear. And we can get into some of that later in the questions if anyone has any questions about that. And we want to make sure that, again, these solutions are viable, they're lasting, and that they make sense for the industry, so that the industry is more likely to adopt them. Some of the ways that we do that, we have our best practice frameworks for the management of fishing and aquaculture gear, separate documents that are meant to be comprehensive guidance documents that reference all the different actors in the seafood supply chain for, again, both wild capture and aquaculture, and provide real practical on-the-ground guidance for how each of those stakeholder groups can prevent, mitigate, and remediate the issue. These are designed to be incorporated into sourcing policies, CSR documents, fisheries management plans, seafood certification programs, voluntary guidelines, workshops, and also to inform solution work around the world. So they really are very comprehensive documents that come with a sort of a background on the issue and why it's important, and then practical steps that each actor in the industry can take. Those are freely available on our website, and I'm happy to forward that off to anyone that's interested. We mentioned data. Data is a big gap here. We want to make sure that we understand how much gear is being lost around the world. One of the things that GGI has created to sort of deal with that, or to facilitate that, is our data portal, which is the largest collection of ghost gear records, consolidated ghost gear records on Earth. We have dozens of data contributing organizations from around the world. And the goal is really to bring all of that data into one central hub, and then make that as publicly accessible as possible for researchers, so they can understand what gear looks like, gear loss looks like around the world. Now, we should preface that by saying that the data that's in the portal is where data is present. If there are areas of the portal where there is no data, that doesn't mean that gear isn't lost there. Gear will be lost wherever there is fishing to some degree, for reasons we discussed earlier. But this is really about just presenting that snapshot of what does the data look like now. And areas where there are high concentrations of data might not just be that that's where a bunch of gear is lost, it's just that's where the data is collected. So we want to also expand our data relationships with those who are collecting that data, and bring as much data into that portal over time as possible. It's just some of the snapshots of our solutions projects that we have ongoing around the world. I won't go into each one of them because I want to make sure that we leave enough time for questions. But we do have a footprint all over the world. And I should point out as well that fishers are involved in every solutions project that we have around the world on some level. They're always involved. It's critical to involve them in the solutions, because, again, nobody wants to see gear get lost. No fisher ever wants to see a whale or a dolphin or a seal or a turtle caught in their gear. I will leave it there so that we have ample time for discussion. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, my contact information is there. Happy to get in touch, and thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joel. I have to say, just because I've sort of interfaced with Joel for several years now in a few different iterations of my job, that I am just so blown away by how quickly, finally, this idea has taken root, and just the advancement in the relationships and the partnerships. A few years ago, maybe I might be getting the time wrong because of the COVID time warp that we've all been living in. But when I heard that the US federal government got on board, I think that started a whole new chain of very positive reactions for other global governments to start getting on board with this program and with commitments to reduce and hopefully eliminate ghost gear from their coastlines. So congratulations, huge effort. So I'll actually start with you, Joel, on the questions. I'm very curious actually as to what happens in those few places where recycling operations exist. What happens with the gear and who tends to get involved?
Yeah, so I could go on and on about this, so I'll try to keep this brief. But generally, there are very few recyclers in the world that can actually handle this gear. Gear's designed to get entangled in stuff. It will get entangled in processing equipment for most recycling companies, even though the material itself is usually highly recyclable. So a lot of the time, that gear needs to be shipped. There are two main recyclers in Europe. One is Plastics in Denmark, and the other is Aquafil in Slovenia, both of which handle different materials. So there is typically a carbon footprint associated with shipping those materials to those organizations, depending on where you are in the world. But the demonstration that we did in Steveston Harbor was because we were sending the material from there to, so from the west coast of Canada to those two locations to be recycled where the plants exist. We were aware of the carbon footprint. But our philosophy was the ships are going there anyway. One more container on it. It has a carbon footprint attached to it, but it's not like we're sending a giant ship that's carrying one container on it. And second, the idea was to spark interest in this issue to show that it could be done, and hopefully have another plant being able to be built, or other plants being built in other areas that can handle the material. And I'm happy to say that now the Ocean Legacy Foundation has actually set up shop in the harbor that I used to work in with recycling material through Innovative Solutions Canada to set up a recycling program to handle the material. So that goal worked out where I was. It hasn't worked out everywhere just yet, but I think you need to demonstrate that this is possible and that there is a value chain there in order to spur that kind of movement. So it's still early days, and of course there are other recyclers there are recyclers in South America. There are some in Southeast Asia that can handle the material. So it's not just exclusively those two in Europe, but the European Commission and the European Union are making it mandatory as of 2025 to have an extended producer responsibility program in place for every member state of the EU to support the collection and the transportation and the logistics and the recycling of that material. Because we're talking about a 20,000 pound net. That's not a light bulb you can return to your electronics store. There needs to be infrastructure put in place to do that. So the Europe I mentioned is because they're leading on that aspect of it right now, but it'll be interesting to see what happens in that space in the next couple of years.
Super. Yep, we will be watching closely. That's great. Thank you. So I'm just going to open this up, and this is a question for each one of you, and we can start with Carol, then go to Chris and Joel. Knowing that sharp line has been drawn in the sand, 2030, somehow there is a general global alignment that by that year, we need to see significant changes in our practices. We need to start seeing positive change happening, from industry, from policymakers, from individual consumers, if we stand a chance of a hopeful future. So from each one of your perspectives, from sort of the data and analysis front, I'll just kind of characterize, Chris, the work that you do as storytelling and emotive kind of action, an emotive action platform. And then yourself, Joel, from, like a really technical industry based place. Where do you think we should focus our energies to create that necessary, significant positive change?
Did you want me to go first?
Sure. Let's just give you an easy one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough question, right? Because you're and this is kind of, this is an interesting panel to address it, because we do have sort of a cross-cutting representation across, industry, storytelling, and data. And the data is telling us that we need to do something drastic, that something has got to give, and it has to give soon. 2030 is only 8 years away. When I think about, I've been at Faunalytics 8 years, and that time has flown by. Haven't gotten nearly all of the things that I've wanted to get done in that 8 years done. And so if we take our lives at like kind of the micro level and expand it outwards, we got to hustle if we want to make a significant change. Now, I know I'm not giving any specific prescriptions on what those changes need to be. I think, each individual needs to think about what is actually within their power to control and to change, whether that means consuming fewer fish, whether that means, being significantly more mindful when traveling about the environmental impacts that you have. Each individual person is going to have a different threshold of what, and then of course, we have, while we have 2.5 billion people that live on coastlines or around coastlines, that leaves, 5 or so billion people that are living in, kind of landlocked areas that may feel like these things are very distant from them. So, but of course they have an impact on the oceans, and we need to communicate to them that their actions, even with, in Idaho or wherever, can have a significant impact on oceans. So it's really going to depend on who you are and where you're at, what you do. That would be the best way I could sort of muddle through an answer for you.
Yep, perfect. Everyone has a role to play. No action, I would say, is insignificant, and we need that collective, large-scale action to create the change that we need to see. But you're right. You're right. Everyone has something that they can contribute towards a more hopeful future. Chris, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me just solve this in the next 2 minutes, and we'll be good to go. That's why we came together.
Excellent.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's so multifaceted, because working with legislators and lawmakers is the fastest way to drive change. And they're not gonna, go out on a limb about this unless they get support from the public or other incentives that cause them to have that behavior. So it's a really, really big issue, I think, as we are all aware of, not to state the obvious, but just, directly advocating to our legislators on the federal, local, state level, every level. If we care about this issue, write to your representatives and let them know that someone cares. Get your friends and family to write a letter, and be mindful in your day-to-day lives how your decisions and your consumer behavior choices impact our oceans. Because I think to my sister in Michigan, with 2 kids, busy with life, it's very tough for folks, a lot of folks in this country to, I live in the United States. It's really tough for folks around the world to take time out of their day to go and lobby their representatives, to learn about it. I know in the last talk, they said exactly this, like the people who are working, they're out working, they want to go home, they want to relax, they want to just, enjoy their lives. And it's so far removed. So for anyone who actually does care about this with a passion, you're attending this conference, find out who your representatives are, write to them, figure out local groups to get involved with, let's focus on getting the people who care to do as much as possible. And then that ripple effect will carry out into our friends, family, those who have a mild interest. And then eventually, as people are inspired, it will hit the larger population with documentaries and doing storytelling, thinking back, so many documentaries are out that share these conservation efforts, and just keeping them in the cycle of Netflix stream You know, it goes so quick. So as long as we keep making them, it'll keep getting streamed. People talk about it. It'll die down for a little bit. Then new one comes out. People come out. So it's a really, really multifaceted approach. And I obviously use video and media to make sure it's in everyone's day. That if they're following Hawaii Marine Life, it shows up in your feed. You think about it for 5 to 10 seconds, and then you go back to whatever else you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, sort of building on that, I mean, the decade of ocean science, you know, up to 2030 that the UN declared is fantastic. But like I said, when I was at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon earlier this year, like in 2030, we're not done. You can't just say that, and I don't think that's what's being tried to be communicated, right? It's just like there's going to be a period of intense work on the ocean. But if you look at the SDGs and what the ocean gets in terms of funding compared to all of the other SDGs, it's minuscule. It's almost embarrassing when the source of life on this planet is the ocean. And, you know, the climate is what makes life possible. And yet somehow these things are not being, I mean, there's a lot of noise about it, but I think what we need to see is behavior change on a species level scale. And I don't think that's ever been done before. I don't think it's ever needed to be done before. How do you do that? And I think that people tend to act when they're affected in their day-to-day lives. I've had the example with ghost gear. Like most people don't have an experiential link with it because they don't see it on a beach when they're there, generally speaking. So they don't know anything about it and they tend not to be too concerned about it. Now you can show them some images and stuff, but like you said, Chris, there were so many different distractions today. You know, people will see some sort of a catastrophic story or something like that, or the latest report from the UN that says, we got to get our stuff together or we're not going to get away from the 2-degree future. You know, we have less and less time and people go, oh, that's awful. And they think about it for 10 seconds and they're back to scrolling through Instagram. There's so many distractions. I don't know how you coalesce the global community. We need, as a species, need to deal with this. And that's something that I think gets lost sometimes. And to be honest, the pandemic, I think, should be an illustrative example of this. If everything seems like it's fine, until it's not. And when it's like it goes to all of a sudden, right? Exponential growth is something that people just aren't hardwired to understand properly. And so I think it's really challenging. I don't have an answer to it. The ocean is a resilient system, but with so many stresses working on it all at the same time, you very likely are going to see a very, like, it's okay until it's not. And when it's not, it's too late. So I think, I don't want to be the doom and gloom here, but it does mean that we as a species need to come together to address this. And I'm open to suggestions about how to get people to stop scrolling through Instagram and actually get out there and do something about it. There are people that are doing it, but we need it on a much larger scale. Trying to find an uplifting way to end that, but I just can't think of one right now.
And I think that it's really important for us to be comfortable with those sobering thoughts and the reality check. It's not all rosy. And on the same level, look at all of us. We're working towards creating change every single day. And no one person, no one organization is going to be able to kind of turn the tide on the conundrum that we've put ourselves in. One of my dreams, and part of this started happening in the global old growth forest fiber sector space that I used to work in. So protecting old growth forests, very similar, you know, kind of end goals is to mitigate climate change, resource, all of that, is that a landscape analysis started being created for what players play what roles with what expertise, and then trying to operate as a coordinated unit of, you know, we need consumer action right now. Okay, these groups are best suited to engage in that space. And that's going to lead to, you know, this particular global summit. So now we know that those voices need to be resonating with the decision makers and so on. I mean, it was certainly not perfect, but that had started happening. And I think that that's maybe a gap that could be filled in the aquatic animal welfare space, is someone kind of sitting at the master control deck and saying, okay, these are the levers that we're going to pull. And, you know, an operations manager, for lack of a better term, for this entire movement to create that coordinated, very strategic change. Anyhow, philosophizing in the early mornings here in Vancouver. We are sadly at the end time of this panel. There's many more hours of discussion that I would love to engage with with all of you. But we do have to call time on this session. So I wanted to pass along a very big thank you again to Chris, to Carol, to Joel, to our audience for participating in this session. Thank you for the wonderful insights, really thought-provoking information that you shared with us. And quickly, before we sign off again, all of these sessions are being recorded. They will be shared with you in very short order. This is for our audience and panelists, so please take a look back at them and share them with your networks. We are 3 of us from the Aquatic Life Institute heading to COP27, one of those large global summits next month, to try to create some awareness about the need to incorporate aquatic animal welfare into climate discussions, into sustainability discussions with our global leaders. So we have some social media posts that we would love for everyone to share in the next short while with your networks, to just draw attention to this issue, and we'll share that. There it is. Thank you so much, Julia, for posting that in our chat. So please, if you could reshare those posts, we would very much appreciate it. And apart from that, we have a panel coming up in 9 minutes, and that one is titled Innovative Tech. So we hope that you'll stick around for that discussion. Thanks again, everyone. Stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day.